It seems a little bit fine. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to an amazing Saturday morning with me, Ribea. This with our breakfast talk. And today, last week, we have discussed Africa, right? And we have given our opinion on matters concerning intermarriages and interrelationships and discussions that affect us as the African nation internationally. And today we want to focus on the intercolor of the African nation. And when we focus on the intercolor of our nation in general, we want to focus on that we've mentioned last week, that explains the fact that the onus to the African person is not that they are trying to reject or oppress another nationality, right? It is that some African people and some African children have to learn to be firm on their Africanism about Africa. And we've mentioned last week that with the reparations and with the reparation requests that are sometimes misunderstood, and sometimes some leaders think reparation has got to do with the financial support for African people, right? Leaders misinterpret the discussion in-house when we look at the international nation in general, when we look at every country that represents themselves, right? When we look at implementations that really benefits the African people, that does not actually exclude other nationalities, but that is actually in the currentness of the inter-Africanness of the international opinion of the African people. It is that we have intermarried, but we are also required to hold on to that. That is the Africanness about us, right? That is now not actually your skin color. That is now not actually the Africa sitting by the other side of South Africa, right next to South Africa, and then South Africa breeds the intercolorness. South Africa breeds the Europeanness, and then Africa is exactly the next door neighbor, and the requirement to hold on to that and to own that and to request that implementations, when there's implementations of African people that have been deprived and oppressed many years ago, and people want that process to now not be oppressing another generation of African people, then it's exactly owning your Africanness and still being able to be fine amongst the international nation, right? It is that we do not, that African people do not request the reparations because of the financial sometimes support that African people sometimes need, and because of the whole abuses that happened many years ago, and now they want to be paid out for it. It is that also educates, and someone has explained it thoroughly to us in his breakfast program, right? He mentioned, and when he mentioned it, exactly learned and listened to what he meant with it, right? And he said that reparation requirement for people to really be paid out for reparations. It's not only African people that went to it, but speaking from an African birth womb, right? Explaining it from an African womb exactly means that the ways of man to oppress the African person is going to be exactly implementation of processes that's going to be non-oppressive to the African person, to the black person that's being called the black person amongst all the persons, right? Amongst everyone else, right? It is those implementations and processes that's not gonna have our generation go through discussions that are racism once again. It is implementing processes that's non-abusive exactly to the African person, and the African person and the black person exactly being fine with being black, exactly being fine with being from Africa, exactly with being fine with representing the African opinion, with the African coloring of how they color it in our nation, right? In our international nations. It is them owning that and not having to conform to what someone else wants them to do, right? It is Africa owning the Africanism about it. It is the black owning the black opinion about it, and the black even being fine with owning and with representing their own opinion. It is not that reparations is something for people to now financially support. No, it is implementation processes. It is not only financial support in certain processes, no, because of abuses, no. It is implementation of processes that is going to be non-abusive to the African person on the day that the African person decides to only want to be the African person on that day. It is on that day that they will find themselves fine in the education room, in their opinion, with being Black Africa, in the internationalness of the amazingness of color in a generation. And therefore, we want to really discuss today the intercolor of the African nations and African people amongst the internations and international countries. And we want to really be firm on that. We are enjoying today a light cup of coffee that I love, right? It's Makono coffee. Some people love their Nescafe. This is Makono, and this is a little bit light. I love a light coffee. But what I want to say about the light coffee is when these implementations are being processed, remember the light coffee that I'm appreciating today comes from what some people call the boer. And the boer was where Mama Martha used to work at. And the children, Mama Anna, them grew up, and the boer coffee was there, and it was amazing. And it was fine. Sometimes Mama Martha had 93 years with the boer's coffee and with the education in the boer's house, right? And 93 years was not easy. No, we never say it was easy because we don't even know half of the story. Many people might have had Google in about it and everything. But what we learned is with the 93 years for Mama Martha was 93 years on earth amongst mankind, right? It is not that mankind do and chooses to be in oppressive lifestyles in order to enjoy a day on earth. It is that those were the reasonings and the ways that people those years used to reason, and they those years called young children into the houses to be slaves, to be also fine for maybe 100 years on earth. And the young children didn't know those years that was sometimes the reasons. And the houses were sometimes oppressed, and the discussions that sometimes nowadays the discussions goes viral. And it's international rooms of how people are going to manage these processes. And for the African people to not want to have their children go through those same what we call sometimes abusive households that was sometimes abusive to some people, and it's not scientific knowledge. And we don't go back to the discussion room because we still enjoy the cup of coffee. We enjoy the education that we also learn sometimes in the houses, that the elderly people also learn in their houses, right? But it is not holding on to that, and it is not trying to get another generation to go through that. It is the mere fact that the intercoloring of the international nation exactly resembles that is freeness, that is the birth womb of Mama Africa amongst different households and amongst different nationalities, and that exactly colors and explains the freeness of our generational children kids in our generational womb of children being born unto the amazingness of earth, right? And we enjoy the colors and the greennesses today with saying that it is that we appreciate that freeness and we allow it for our children. And we're not always going to know when people are working on processes to once again have apartheid regimes without us realizing it. And it is not that apartheid regimes are over now, because young people today in countries find themselves imprisoned. We always educate that for the people who came out of the apartheid praises and the apartheid pains and the apartheid arguments, there's now not African people finding themselves in prison. No, it's now Europeans and different people that are in prisons today. They are imprisoned with the same mentality sometimes, but it is years of generations of guys that sits in prison because of crimes that related to all of the arguments that mankind had for years. That is not so difficult for mankind to really work themselves out of that they abuse one another and where they want to be in their lifestyle choices. It is that a whole generation of people find themselves these years in prison, men and women also in prison, but find themselves in that same abuse. And we are not going to say that we are now distracting away from what are still happening in the currentness of our generation, because we always say in the currentness of where our generation finds themselves at. And we are not arguing away and saying that that's not happening. And now we are focusing on reparation, the requirements. No, it is that all of these processes in discussions needs to go into one discussion house. And these oppressions that sometimes only happens in certain family lines and in certain households without explanations of why certain households find themselves in poverty and in abuse, and with young children of parents being imprisoned for years, and and pardon me, fathers find themselves imprisoned for 100 years. Sometimes people sit for life in prison because of things that they did not want to do, but that they were required to do, that someone paid them to go and do, that someone forced them to go and do, that someone oppressed them to go and do, that someone threatened them to go and do. So it's the same apartheid regime that's happening in prisons today, but it's happening in a different color. And when we educate our generation out of the imprisonment that is happening in our generation, we exactly educate our generation to not hold on to the oppressions that has happened to them, but to listen into the current class of people that are still finding themselves oppressed. And the more that we argue about those circumstances, is the more some people are going to find themselves in those arguments and discussions, because there's a lot that a lot of people has been involved with, right? A lot of corruptions and bankrupt and kidnapping and children abductions that people were involved with, that many parliamentary leaders, I always say, was in the discussion room while they realized what was happening in their countries, while they had Google enough every abuse that happened in countries, right? Google in, we always say, is in every community. It is everywhere visible. And it is not for people to say that they can't find way to manage those processes. It is what are we gonna do to allow ourselves to remain fine with where we are at with our education, but to not allow the oppression to once again have another generation and once again take hold and once again abuse another generation throughout. It is that we educate ourselves in all of the amazing colorness of this, is that this is acceptance, and this is our requirement as mankind, and this is where we are required to find ourselves in the opinion room of how we opinionate concerning these discussions, our opinion about these discussions, and how we educate ourselves that we are not gonna go over arguments that has happened many years ago, but we are not gonna also allow our children that we give birth to really walk in seasons that people even try to implement processes that would have some households and children in imprisonment and in apartheid lifestyle, right? It is that we do not ignore the current discussions that happens in our generation. We do not ignore why people don't want to get out of the mindset of oppressing one another. We do not ignore the fact that some parliamentary leaders really don't, or really it's not, we always say we don't blame the parliamentary leader, but we blame the whole parliamentary house about it. And we blame every decision maker, and we blame every house that forms part of the House of Parliament. We do not only blame the ruling house that rules the country in the currentness of our season, but we blame everyone that sits in the meetings and that have an opinion in those meetings, and that still finds themselves oppressing and abusing the processes that can sometimes be non-oppressive and non-abusive to our generation. And yet we have also learned that a lot of that has got to do with our war guys that goes into war and that are aggressive, and that has got their processes that they want mankind to manage, and parliamentary leaders and parliamentary houses to manage in a way that the world are also going to be abused, the way guys that goes into war also are abused in war. And we do not disregard the fact that all of these discussions are happening in the parliamentary house. But we also learn that there's always a way for mankind to learn to work on all of these processes, so that mankind does not abuse the one the other so much when it comes to the amazingness of being born on earth, right? Because it is amazing to celebrate all the colors and the intercolorness of it. But we do not disregard the currentness of what is happening amongst all the colors and all of the opinions and all of the angers and the hatreds and the abuses that happens not only in African households in our season, but that happens in every household in our international countries. When we look at our countries are very much divided. In our countries have very much put all the brother Richards on a seat. All the brother Richards sits on a seat, and they are all having war. The Sudan brother Richards, Putin brother Richards, Zelensky brother Richards. And when I talk about brother Richards, I talk about my brother Richard Philander. And there's a film about the process, and it's called A Christmas Prince, right? And the film will exactly explain to you what's happening and what the argument in our generation is currently about. And all the brother Richards that now looks the same like my brother Richard, my late brother Richard, who was somewhat oppressed by mankind, by our community. And by the secondary school, they exactly knew the boy. That messages went from the secondary school to the parliamentary house about the boy, and how the boy are well educated, and how the boy are well presented, and where the boy find themselves at. And the communications went viral about the boy, and the boy's lifestyle went through abuses, and he went through oppressions, and he went through disrespect in the community. And it was like a wind that was swirling the boy from one side to the other. And all because of communications that was misinterpreted, messages that people sometimes send around the world about you. And that's sometimes a world ruling process for certain countries, where they send messages about people, and the messages are sometimes not true, and young people find themselves endangered by that world ruling process. And that has exactly caused the world exactly today to be in war, where Putin and Zelensky are exactly families of the same presence and of the same country, and they today find themselves in a prison with one another. And when you look at them, they look at them, my brother Richard, they look like him, that was abused many years ago by processes of the world, and that has to sometimes find himself firm. And then the abuse sometimes is not visible, because no one can sometimes tell you who is sending the messages. No one can sometimes tell you what anyone did to Brother Richard. No one can sometimes tell you that it really happened. And to the world today, it's some things that the world calls natural causes that happens. That when we learn today, that natural causes has never been natural causes. It's a way of ruling the world and the way of life that many generations have find themselves at. And they find themselves living long years on earth, and has learned to oppress other people in other households in order to enjoy a nice, amazing time on earth, right? And it is that we always say that what happens between Putin and Zelensky is not that they want to stand like that. No. It is not that they have asked themselves to be in those positions. No. It is that they are exactly being oppressed by different leaders in the world today that exactly keeps them in that seat, because of discussions, because of people thinking that Putin was now representing the mafia side of the world. And in the meantime, the mafia guys and the gangsters in prison required someone to speak up for them, right? Required someone to have an opinion for them that are being oppressed in this world. And today, Putin and Zelensky are exactly being punished by the world just because of what they represented in our countries in general. And they are exactly the brother Richards, and they exactly look the same as my brother Richard. And today you look at the world and you say, but actually there's half of a generation in mankind that's fighting another half of the generation. It's like all the guys are fighting the brother Richards to go into war, and other half of the guys are amazingly standing and looking in and having a nice time with wanting to control mankind. And these are not processes that people are only working on today. No, it's processes that people and their families and households have worked on for many years. I always say that we always had blood counts and the blood checks that goes to international countries. And when the blood check goes, they take exactly the family lines of what nationalities and what people. And our generation today finds themselves even in those discussions. And it is a lot to say and a lot to discuss in a room. But it is not for us to ignore the fact that those two guys standing there in Russia, Ukraine, the Sudan war that started after that, is exactly oppression of that brother Richard boy. Because the Sudan brother Richard boy was exactly my own, looking exactly like my own brother. And when you tune in, you can exactly see that our generation are somewhat divided. But within the division, we learn that we are actually family, and that our leaders and people managing these processes sometimes require us to educate them out of the abusivenesses that they have held on for many years. And that is all that I wanted to say in our intercoloring of how our generation looks in general. and of our African nationality and African nation, and to hold on to the African opinion about it, into the familyness of Africa. Today, everyone educates themselves that the family lines are this, and they're going to therefore have to fight. And you look at Africa, and the one African shoots the other African down, and you want to educate them, but that's exactly not the process, because we are intercoloring, and when by the time we are intercoloring, then Africa can't find themselves now fighting Africa about it, all of those manipulative processes that we can sometimes get right, and that we can sometimes not abuse one another, and that our generation can sometimes learn that the amazingness of this universe is that we are one house, and that one house education needs to remain into the currentness of our educations in our generation season. And that is it of what I wanted to discuss today on our breakfast talk with me, Ribea, Elise, and with our intercoloring, right, of our African nation and African nationality, and owning that of you, that is your every opinion, right? And you being fine with owning your every opinion with where you are born at in your birth womb, right? Your opinion that exactly represents your birth womb, and being fine exactly in that is that requirement for us to educate at in the challenges that our generation are currently having. And that is it for me, Ribea, Elise, everyone. Yes, our YouTube page is going amazing. And yeah, our subscribers have increased. And we say thank you to the teams that that amazingly manage that process for us. That is great. Yeah, we appreciate that. And yeah, so social media, we are doing good. And Team Zara official, yes, if y'all are listening, thank you. Y'all have sent me an email, and I have taken some time to reply, right? But now I've really replied for that collaboration. Yes, we are excited about it, and we actually have replied on that. So yeah, that's what I want to say. Thank you for all the other fashion teams, right? And for everyone else that really inspired by our ideas, by our color ideas. It's not we only educate color so that you go and wear the same that I'm wearing now in the environment. And I always say my places where you find yourself at in business, you exactly wear the attire, but the coloring education is one nation, one generation approach, right? One internation approach that we educate at, with all the challenges and discussions and arguments that includes every one of our humanity and every one of our countries in general. That's it for today, everyone. Have an amazing Saturday further.